Hello, this is William Hemphill, and we thank you for joining us for today's message on the Empowered Life with William YouTube channel. Today, I want to start a series on identity formation, and part one of that series is Who Gets to Define You? The seven building blocks of identity. And we're going to come from Exodus chapter 1 and Exodus chapter 2. But I want to start a little bit with just a personal story. Uh, One of the things you may know about me, not only am I a preacher, I'm a PK, a preacher's kid. And one of the things, the struggles I had growing up was my father liked to push me toward excellence. But in trying to push me toward excellence, he often led with criticism instead of affirmation. And so what would happen is when I had an accomplishment, there were a lot of times early in my life when he was saying that was no big deal. You were supposed to do that. There was no celebration or no recognition. In other words, achievement didn't count. And while my father meant good, I carried that criticism within me for decades. I would dismiss my own accomplishments. I would oftentimes be unable to receive validation from other people. And I always felt like that whatever I did wasn't good enough. Now, I use as an example for us to understand that's how identity gets formed through repetition and through messages, through what's reflected back to us by the people that matter most in our lives. In Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 14 and verse 22, it says the following. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come and let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase. And in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore, they sent taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service. Pharaoh commanded all his people, verse 22, every boy that is born to the Hebrews, you shall throw them into the Nile. Exodus chapter 2, we can look at a little more later on, but that talks about the birth and the rescue of Moses, how Moses had an Egyptian name and a Hebrew body, two mothers, and one could say liminal from birth. In other words, he existed in two spaces, not fully belonging. Principle I want us to remember as we think about identity formation. Identity is not discovered, it is constructed. Identity is not discovered, it is constructed through repetition, relationship, and environment over time. The question for us is this: it's not whether identity is being formed, but by whom and toward what end is identity being formed in us. There are seven raw materials of identity formation: mirror, message, memory, meaning, model, membership, and mastery. Let's talk about those briefly. Number one is mirror. What do I see what do I see reflected back about myself from others? When we're young, we don't know who we are by looking inward. So often we look outward and see what is reflected back at us. We look at faces, we see smiles, we see laughter, We see people light up, or we see displeasure, sadness, and anger. In other words, we look or mirror what is reflected to us. If a child only sees disappointment or suspicion or indifference reflected back, they don't conclude that something is wrong with them. A child will look at that and say, something is wrong with me. That's how mirroring works. In Exodus, Israel looked at Egypt's mirror of them and saw threat, saw danger, saw expendability. And over time, they learned to see themselves that way also. One of the biggest struggles of Israel, even when they tried to head to the promised land later on, was we look like grasshoppers. This comes all the way back to how the mirrors work and what Egypt showed Israel. Who were the first mirrors in your life and what did they reflect? Number two, message. Message. Message simply is, what am I told repeatedly about who I am? Identity is not shaped by what is said once, but it's shaped by what is said over and over and over and over and over again. You're too much. You're too quiet. You were supposed to do that. That's the one I internalized over and over and over and over and over again until when I accomplished something in life, like graduating from Georgia Tech or getting a seminary degree or pastoring a church or solving a project in corporate America, I would say to myself, I was supposed to do that. Messages repeatedly told me about who I was to the point that I internalized them because they were consistent. Exodus. Moses, nor Pharaoh, I should say, didn't have to tell Israel once they were slaves. Pharaoh or empire told Israel they were slaves every day. They had quotas. They had taskmasters. They punished them. They oppressed them. And oppression works by repetition. What message did you hear so often? That it stopped sounding like a voice and started sounding like truth to you. Number three, memory, the third M. What stories am I given about where I come from? Memory, we like to say, is identity's backbone. If you control someone's memory, you don't have to control them directly. You just shape what they believe is possible. It's one of the reasons in the biblical text where Israel is told to remember the story of the Exodus from Egypt. In other words, they're remembering identity. It's one of the reasons that African Americans are often told to remember their history. You're remembering the story so you can understand what is possible. When stories are erased, people forget who they are. I want us to think about that one for a moment. When stories are erased, people forget who they are. Almost makes you want to ask the question, why is someone trying to erase your story? Why is someone trying to invalidate your story? If we look back at the Exodus passage, one of the things it said was there came a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. In other words, he either didn't know the story or he chose to forget the story. Some would say it was strategic forgetting because empires like to strategically forget stories of those who are oppressed. When Israel forgot Joseph's story. They then forgot God's favor on them that came when they were in a time of famine. They forgot that God was with them and helped them to survive. And they forgot about God's grace and intervention. And that made them easier to oppress and to dominate. What parts of your story were celebrated? What parts were never told? And here's another one. What parts are people trying to get you to forget? Number 4 is meaning. How is my experience interpreted for me? Meaning answers the question, what does this say about me? Two people can live the same experience but receive very different interpretations. I want to pause there because that's so important. I often use that when I'm talking about marital therapy or family therapy or something else. Two people can live the same experience but receive very different interpretations. Pain can be named as injury, as weakness, as sin, as strength, or as survival, for example. Whoever interprets your experience shapes your identity. Israel's suffering was framed as you deserve this, you're dangerous, you're less than. God in the scripture says, I've heard your cry, I've heard your suffering, and I'm coming down to deliver. Healing begins when meaning changes. Who taught you how to interpret your pain, or who failed to even acknowledge your pain? Number 5, model. Who do I see that looks like a possible future self? Why is this important? It's important because we cannot imagine what we've never seen. If no one like you leads, speaks, rests, or thrives, your imagination shrinks. It's one of the things that I talk about politically about the symbol of President Barack Obama. For a people that were in a country that had to fight for citizenship and rights, to see someone that actually looked like them that was a president was a symbol. It allowed people to think, maybe I can accomplish more. Moses grew up seeing Egyptian power, but not Hebraic leadership. And so that absence created tension. He knew how to live in the palace because he lived in Pharaoh's house, but he did not know how to belong to his people. When we imagine our future, who do we see? What image are we looking at? And how does it shape where we want to go? Number 6, membership. What groups claim me and what do they require? Every group says you can be here, but not that part of you. Membership teaches us what to hide, what to perform, and what to silence. Egypt gave Moses status, but not belonging. Israel offered belonging, but not clarity. He lived in between two worlds, and that tension shaped his calling. Where did you learn that belonging often required to have you suppress part of yourself? And finally, number 7, mastery. What am I allowed to try, to fail at, and to succeed in? Mastery answers the question, do I get room to grow? In a child with a perfectionistic background like what I had, it was dangerous to make mistakes. In other words, there was going to be criticism, punishment, or something else if I made a mistake, which, although it was meant to be good by some of the elders in my life, it also restricted restricted the ability to grow. Mastery asks the question, do I get room to grow? Am I allowed to fail forward? Or am I punished for trying? Israel wasn't allowed mastery. Labor, no creativity, no ownership, no growth, just punishment. Slavery kills mastery because it threatens control. Where or when did you learn that trying wasn't worth the cost? Every one of us was formed by these 7 M's. Every one of us was formed by these 7 M's: mirroring, messaging, memory, meaning, model, membership, and mastery. Membership and mastery. Here's the thing. Some of it nurtured us. Some of it wounded us. But none of them were neutral. Here's the good news. God doesn't erase identity formation. God redeems identity formation. The Hebrews had an identity before Egypt. They were the covenant people. They worshiped the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Empire's first move, as represented by Pharaoh, was to replace that identity with labor and slavery. Moses himself was formed by 2 mothers, 2 cultures, 2 names. He was liminal from birth. But God even redeemed that. He belonged nowhere and everywhere, but that liminality would become his qualification to be a liberator for the Israelites. Every one of us is being formed and shaped. The question is, are we aware of who's doing the shaping and what they want from us? Closing question for today. Who was doing the talking and what purposes did their messages serve, yours or theirs? This is William Hemphill thanking you for joining me today for this particular broadcast. Please subscribe to the channel to receive more teachings, Empowered Life with William. If this has blessed you, please share this with someone else. I also have a book, The Confidence Walk, helping us to reframe identities and walk with complete confidence. That book is at www.confidencewalk.net. You can also connect with me at williamhemphill2.com. And for any business inquiries, check in at admin1 at faithandfamilyempowerment.com. And remember, as we close, remember to love God, love people, and love yourself. Take care. God bless you.